In this episode of Financial Reporting Clarity Insights for Nonprofits, today I want to talk about the role of budgeting in achieving reporting clarity. So, as in many nonprofits, budgeting is usually a one-time annual exercise. For example, for those organizations that are keen on budget monitoring, sometimes we get to see monthly or quarterly budgetary forecasting embedded in their as part of the organizational wide reporting requirements. But most of the time, you find that in many organizations, once the budget is done and is approved, then it is just a one-time annual exercise, and the budget is mainly kept for reference to just check that they are working within it. But in reality, if you were to envision, you would realize that your budget infrastructure is the foundation of your reporting clarity. If the budget is misaligned, fragmented, or overly project driven, then you're likely to suffer the consequences of confusing financial reports, which I highlighted in episode 2 of this series of how financial non-clarity in financial reporting brings a lot of confusion and some of the misalignments that we get from having unclear non-financial reports. So why does it always feel like reporting is hard or complex in some non-profits? Maybe not all, but in most of the time. I feel this is because most nonprofits have to balance both restricted and unrestricted funding, and at the same time, they would also like to budget by strategy instead of by project. So chances are, if you are one of these organizations, that you are keen in driving your strategy and budgeting as per your strategy, but at the same time you have unrestricted funding at the same time, and you're working to have all these three aspects make sense together, chances are that you have or you are experiencing at least one of these challenges. There is different reports that you need to make, and so they take so long to prepare. Then you find that programs and finance numbers most of the times are not aligning because everybody is trying to track things differently. You also find that sometimes donor reports feel disconnected from the board reports. You have to make a whole new pack for how you align your strategy in terms of your internal reports that you give to the board. And at the same time, you have to use the same data to align on how to report to the donors as per their reporting template. Then you also find that you are constantly re-explaining variances because you're looking at things from different angles every time, and so things keeps changing, figures keeps moving, and so you have to constantly keep re-explaining variances. And again, finally, you will find that your audits may feel a bit stressful or even maybe reactive because of things that are coming up as a surprise in the whole process. But why am I talking about this? Why do I feel like I have the clarity to talk about these challenges? For almost 2 decades, I have worked with nonprofits across organizations managing complex funding structures, restricted grants, unrestricted funds, multi-donor grants, and even strategic funds for pooling strategic funding, strategic funding pools. And so I've supported many nonprofits at different stages, from growing organizations to maturing ones, multi-country operations, and I've seen the same pattern over and over again. So when budgets are built with clarity and intent, reporting flows. I have seen that also. But when they are not, you find that teams struggle month after month, no matter how skilled they are. So everything I'm sharing today comes from a real nonprofit experience and not just theory or book read. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, the strategic budgeting versus project budgeting, because this confuses a lot. And especially you find that if you are moving from an organization that primarily maybe was handling one big project and so was very much project aligned in terms of how they did their budgeting, and they only needed to worry about recovery of overheads. And then you come into this other organization that has a whole mix of small grants here and there that come together and build a whole portfolio for the organization. So you find that in the project-based budgeting, it basically answers the question of how much does this donor project cost and for how long. So it's simple and easy. This is the project that you want to do. This is the money that you're having, and this is the period of implementation. This is the staff. These are the project resources, and this is the overheads, and you're home and dry. But then on the other hand, with the strategic budgeting, it answers a more powerful question. How do our financial resources advance our mission priorities? But also you find that usually, and as the funding portfolio and the nonprofit funding portfolio changes, it's coming to term, and it's coming to act, and it's coming to reality that not many organizations can just be project based. There is no longer that level of larger institutional funding that will just let an organization just have one big funding and that's all they are depending on. There will always be a mix of funding, both restricted and unrestricted, and that's where now this alignment must come in. So you find that strategic budgets are built around strategic pillars, core programs for the organizational capabilities, long-term outcomes, in however way that that particular organization wants to track their growth in terms of resources and their strategic alignment. So this approach is, for me, is absolutely the right direction. And I think for many nonprofits who are set on organizational building, they would definitely be wanting to build their budgets aligned to their strategic uh, plan, as opposed to projects implementation. But as I've said earlier, strategic budgeting parallel with project budgeting, because most of the time you find that there are two that are coexisting together. There you have one substantially restricted larger portion of a grant that is funding your strategic budget. So it's always the case in most organizations, as we know. And so it comes with its share of chaos. And sometimes, if it's not structured correctly, it can really, really be difficult to hack. So, what's some of the hidden risks with restricted and unrestricted funding pools? So, in nonprofits with this kind of mixed funding, every dollar comes with rules, expectations, and accountability. So you find that restricted funds must be tracked separately, must align to donor intent, and must be reported precisely. On the other hand, unrestricted funds provide the flexibility that every organization needs, supports cooperations, and many of the times often subsidizes the strategic work. So these are some of the funds that can also be assigned to the strategic funding pool. But here is the common mistake that I have seen that happens in such circumstances. The strategic budget is first built and everybody agrees to it, and all the parameters are aligned and all the annual targets are keyed in. But then you find that later on, the restricted funds are layered in as an adjustment. So there is already a conflict in how these two fit. So, and this is now where the problem begins, because now there's manual reallocations, there is confusing variances, there's misaligned donor reports, and also audits become not so easy. So reporting clarity breaks down because the budget never anticipated the reporting reality. How the budgets were done did not really put a good foundation for the reporting reality and clarity that's required thereafter. But then it's important that you see your budget not just as a financial plan, but as a reporting blueprint. A strong strategic budget should allow you to report by strategy, report by cost center or department, report by donor, report by program, reconcile all this without rebuilding the numbers. It should allow you to always just be able to click build your reporting infrastructure and be able to draw these reports without having to rebuild the numbers all the time. So if that's not possible, then finance teams usually end up recreating logics every month, explaining instead of analyzing, and fixing instead of leading. They spend a lot of time trying to fix reports here and there to make sense from the different angles. So you'll find that this for finance is normally not a shortage in skills issue, but it's just a design issue. The budget design issue is not enabling them to be optimum in their delivery of the reports. So what would we say therefore is a clarity that's driven by a budget? How does that look like? So a clarity-driven nonprofit budget, for me, as I understand it, has three defining features. First, that it has a strategic anchoring. Every line item clearly links to a strategic priority, not just a department. So there is every intent that every line item is set in the budgeting infrastructure to link to a strategic priority and the budget and all the parameters. And secondly, there is also the funding visibility. From your budgeting infrastructure, you can easily see where restricted funds are, where unrestricted funds are also supporting in the budget, and which activities are co-funded. The third thing that I see from a clear written budget is that the budget structure mirrors how leadership, donors, and auditors will ask questions. So this is already thought about and created as you build your budget, as you create your budgeting template, as you draw your budget from the beginning. You're already thinking about what is the leadership wanting to see, and am I building my budget template with that in mind? What are my donors wanting to see? What are some of the parameters that we want to measure and see as an organization? And are we taking this in as we try to dissect this issue of uh, restricted funds and our strategic budget? But so when this alignment exists, the reports definitely are faster, variances are easy to explain, and then so your conversations start shifting from what happened to what should we do next. And so this also changes the leadership conversations, because when your budgets are clear, reporting becomes empowering, as I've said earlier. Then the finance team also stops defending numbers and they just start supporting decisions because there's clarity in how the figures flow. Then we also have clear figures and explanations to the board, so there is the confusion, and the confusion is actually turned to confidence. And also we also have clear reports to donors, so limited feedback from donors, and trust grows. So this is how I know nonprofits build financial credibility, not through better explanations, but through better foundations. And the budgeting process is one of such foundations. So I think it's important to note that your budget structure is not just a planning document. It's the first chapter to your financial story. When it's built with intention, structure, and strategy in mind, reporting becomes clearer, credible, and decision ready. This is exactly the work I do with nonprofits, starting with the budgeting structure before actually fixing the report, because clear reports start long before the reporting is written. Thank you for watching and hope to see you in the next video where we'll try to see further what clear budgets exactly look like. How do they enable us? Thank you.